from William Blake. Would you like me to use the microphone? Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I know we have our microphone for the online. All right, here we go. This world is a world of imagination and vision. I see everything I paint in this world, but everybody does not see alike. To the eyes of a miser, a guinea is far more beautiful than the sun, and a bag worn with the use of money has more beautiful proportions than a vine filled with grapes. The tree, which moves some to tears of joy, is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. Some see nature all ridicule and deformity, and by these I shall not regulate my proportions. Some scarce see nature at all. But to the eyes of the man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. As a man is, so he sees.
Please join us for some centering music from Mike Alec, our musician.
Wow. Thanks, Mike. Oh, sweet, definitely. Yeah. Well, a number of things I want to share with you this morning, but first, a story. Once, there was a man among the very first people who had cows mottled black and white like day and night. He loved those cows, for every morning they gave him sweet cream. So every day he would travel out to find sweet green grazing for his cows. He would watch them, and when they were full and they were fat and they were happy, he would bring them home and lock them safe in the kraal And then he would sleep, and as he slept, he dreamt of all the sweet cream he would enjoy in the morning. But one morning, he went to milk his cows, and they were dry. They had no milk, they had no cream. And he thought, I have not been a good enough master. I must find better grazing, greener pastures. And so he led them further than he had gone before. And he found sweet green grazing for his cows and watched them until they were full and fat and happy, and brought them home that night and locked them safe in the kraal. And then he slept, and again he dreamt of all that sweet cream. But in the morning, again, they were dry. They had no milk, they had no cream. So he did as he had done before. And again, and again, but again. So he became suspicious. And he did as he always had done, grazing his cattle and then locking them safe. But that night he did not sleep. Instead, he crept to the place where his cows were kept, and he watched them all night. He watched them all night. He watched them all night. Late into the night, a bright star appeared on the horizon, and as he watched from his hiding place, it rose swiftly up into the sky above his cows. And then as he watched from his hiding place, amazed, down from that bright star there stretched a long ladder of light, reaching down from the sky, reaching down to his cows. And then as he watched, amazed, down that long ladder of light came many beautiful women climbing out of the sky, going to his cows and milking them dry. He snapped from his enchantment. He leapt from his hiding place. He cried, "Stop, thieves!" But they were quick, and they quickly climbed up the ladder away from him. But he was swift enough to catch the last of the women from the sky by the ankle and hold her fast, and would not let her go. And at last, the other women from the sky pulled the ladder up behind them, and that one woman fell to the earth. And the man said, "Woman, you have taken from me. You owe me." And the woman said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I will stay here, and I will work for you and repay this debt that my sisters and I owe to you." And the man said, "That is fair." And so the man from the earth and the woman from the sky worked side by side for many days, caring for those cows, and never again was he bothered by thieves in the night. But the day came when the man came to the woman, and he said, "Woman, you have repaid your debt to me. You are free to go. But if I could have my wish, you would choose to stay, for I've grown very fond of you as we have worked together these many days, and I'd be most happy if you would agree to be my wife." And the woman said, "I was hoping you'd say something like that. You're a good man. This is a good world. I can be happy here. I will be your wife if you will make a promise." He said, "Name it." She said, "As you see, I carry with me this basket I bring from the sky. You must promise never to open this basket and look inside unless I first bid you to do so." And the man thought, women, what a simple thing. What a silly thing. Then the man said, "I promise." And so the man from the earth and the woman from the sky were married and lived happily together, and soon they grew fat on sweet cream. But do you know what it's like with a secret? Every day that basket stood there. Every night that basket stood there. Never was it opened. Never was it mentioned. And the man began to think, what's with the basket? What is her secret? What is she keeping from me? Why doesn't she trust me? Why should I trust her? And then he thought, this is my house. She is my wife. This is my basket. And so one day when she was out and he was in, he went to the basket, lifted its lid, and looked inside. He began to laugh, and at the sound of his laughter, his wife came in and said, "Husband, you have broken your promise." And the man said, "Wife, yes, it is true. I looked inside the basket. That is true. But wife, what was this terrible secret that had you in fear and me in distrust? I looked inside the basket, but there's nothing to fear, for there is nothing here. As far as I can see, this basket is empty." You are so silly. Women are so silly. She said nothing, but replacing the lid upon the basket, lifted it up, turned, and walked away. And never again was she seen in this world. And ever after that, that man wandered, sleepless at night, staring at the sky, looking for something he lost. Now, some say that she left him because he broke his promise, and a promise is a promise. But some say she left him because when he looked inside the basket, he could see nothing there. And still it happens. We are, all of us, sometimes blind to the treasures of others. The Sky Woman's basket. So, I start with that story because it's something of an enigmatic story, but it has in it an image that I have found useful and intriguing. The image and the problem of looking into the basket. And in that story, that man looks and he sees nothing there. And so he decides nothing is there, that it's empty. He might have looked in the basket and seeing nothing there, have thought, why don't I see what's so important? What am I missing? That might have led to a different ending to the story, right? Rather than the end of the story, it might have been the beginning of a relationship. There's something in that idea that resonates with my experience with mythology and folklore in general. Having come from an education and an idea which may be common experience among all of us here. I recall a lesson about myth from early childhood, basically in the age of science, saying that long ago, people created stories because they were ignorant and they were fearful of the world around them. And so they invented explanations to calm their fears and to explain the mysteries of the world around them. Does that sound like a familiar idea? Yeah. I mean, I can clearly remember a second grade classroom with the teacher with the latest technology using a film strip projector and a record player. And the record player had a voice on it, and it was timed to the movement of the frames on the film strip, so that when you'd heard it beep, the teacher would advance the film strip frame by frame, and the man's voice on the record player would say, "Long ago, people did not understand the world around them." Beep. You see an image of a fire or a cave or something, you know. They explained mysteries such as thunder and lightning by inventing stories. Beep, you know, and then it would go on. Today, our sciences, beep, because of course it would be a science lesson, understand these things. You know? So essentially, that lesson was that the Sky Woman's basket is empty. In other words, long ago, people told stories, but we don't really need those stories any longer. We no longer have need of them. They have no value for us because we have science. And we can explain now these things that once were a mystery to our ancestors. And just to kind of demonstrate the ubiquity of this notion, it still abounds. I have it here in the introduction by Kenneth Davis to this rather nice compendium of world mythology called Don't Know Much About Mythology. And so in his opening remarks, Davis observes, one of the chief reasons that myths came into being was because people couldn't provide scientific explanations for the world around them. Natural events, as well as human behavior, all came to be understood through tales of gods, goddesses, and heroes. Thunder, earthquakes, eclipses, the seasons, rain, and the success of crops were all due to the intervention of powerful gods. Human behavior was also the work of the gods. Essentially, in the introduction of a book of mythology, as I read it, he's saying, this basket is empty. These are the quaint artifacts of a bygone way of thinking and an era of ignorance and fear and superstition and childlike behavior. And I try to imagine, you know, of a father and a son, our earliest ancestors, maybe hunter-gatherers, maybe cave dwellers. The sky is dark and the lightning flashes and the thunder booms, and the child says, "Dad, what's that?" And the father says, "Well, since I don't have science and I can't explain it to you, I'll invent a story about giants playing with boulders in the sky." Davis goes on to say, obviously, we now have many more scientific answers for most of our questions about the world and universe. We know why the sun rises and sets, and why the rain falls in some seasons and not in others, what makes crops grow. We have a much better understanding of where we came from. We understand illness and death to a certain degree. And although the source of evil in the world, why bad things happen to good people, is still a great mystery, we have even begun to unravel the beginnings of the universe. Do you hear what I hear? Maybe a kind of hubris, perhaps, a sense of now we've got it figured out, right? And now we know better. And you know, as a storyteller who have been similar to Davis, I was drawn to these early myths and these stories that came from our earliest ancestors in various different places around the world, from cultures radically different from ours today. Having attempted to interpret those stories and to tell those stories, I realized that my problem has been the problem of the Sky Woman's basket. How do I look into these stories? And if I don't see anything there, rather than dismiss them as being of no value, look again and try to bring to my vision, my eyes, my sight, something that suggests the value of the story. For the story has lasted for at least long enough to be here with us, thousands and thousands of years, right? From people radically distant and different from us in many ways, and yet the story endures. Maybe there is something in that basket, even if we can't see it, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from today. And I think what do I want to share with you are some of the ideas that I have found interesting and intriguing, and some of the insights maybe that have come to me from this problem, but mostly it's open-ended. It's a question. It's a question about seeing and how we see. And an observation too, a little bit about how our seeing may be changing as well. For example, the anthropologist Lynn Kelly, who writes beautifully about oral traditional knowledge keeping, first of all, makes a distinction between oral culture and literate culture, what we might call non-literate culture, which we sometimes confuse to mean or interpret to mean illiterate culture. But she makes the point that you cannot be illiterate in a culture that does not employ literature. Right? You can only be illiterate in a culture that relies on literary practice. Right? So non-literate is a different notion, although it has that connotation of illiteracy. In other words, stupid, right? Don't we mean that somebody who is illiterate is ignorant or, stupid, right? So this notion gets carried on that these people don't think or carry knowledge or manage their information the way we do. Therefore, their information must be suspect or maybe empty of value, right? She makes the observation, traditional peoples would not have survived had they lived, as so often portrayed, in a fog of superstition and pre-logical irrational thinking. Oral cultures use complex and sophisticated artificial memory techniques that are no longer in broad use because the advent of writing takes away our need to commit to memory the knowledge on which our lives and culture depend. So her studies have really to light something in the Sky Woman's basket that maybe we haven't seen there before, which is the fact that oral traditional cultures with a variety of practices and strategies manage to keep knowledge and memory in such an effective manner that they were able to employ really a great depth of knowledge in managing the lives that they lived, the memories, their history, and the world around them. In techniques that to us seem strange because they've kind of been atrophied in a literate culture. In a sense, oral traditional culture holds in its possession the roots of our modern arts, which have somehow become divorced from our notion of knowledge, right? That we have the fine arts, and then we have the sciences and the academic arts, right? As if they were different. Whereas the ability to tell a story well, to sing a song, to dance a dance, to draw a picture, these were all very sophisticated methods for knowing something. If you wanted to know something, you didn't read it, you didn't write it, you sang it, you danced it, you told the story of it, But as we get away from knowing in this way, then those practices end up being kind of marginalized in various different ways. And one example is the way in which informational stories, which we find are still with us and popular from oral traditional cultures, may be treated as quaint or childlike. And I'm thinking, this is a story I think that you were referencing too, Molly, one that comes from the Cherokee peoples of the Carolinas. And they tell of a time when the world was cold and the animals had to have extra thick fur and feathers in order to keep themselves warm. And the thunder, seeing the suffering of the animals, decided to give them the gift of fire by sending down a lightning bolt into the core of a hollow sycamore tree on an island in the center of a great lake. Now, the fire was distant, but the animals knew that somehow it would bring them comfort in the cold. And so they all gathered together and decided how they would go and get this thing called fire. And each in turn makes their effort. The first to speak up is the very proud and boastful raven, who had beautiful feathers, blue feathers, and a lovely singing voice. And he sang to them all, "I will go and get this fire and become a hero among all of you." And the result is the raven that you know today, burned and croaking, right, as he attempted to dive into the fire to bring it back. As they learned about the fire, one after another fails. The snake is forever cold-blooded now, and its skin peels as if blistered by heat. The owl's eyes so singed from the fire that it prefers to open its eyes at night rather than during the bright, painful light of the day. All of these things happen as a result of the efforts of the different animals trying to bring fire into the world. And finally, the one who succeeds is the little water spider, who skims across the surface of the water, crawls across the island and up the hollow outside of the sycamore tree where the fire is blazing, and drops a little bowl of webbing down into the fire and pulls out an ember and brings that back across the water. And then immediately is ridiculed by the other animals for bringing such a small piece of the fire back, but observes that, well, you know, a tree grows from a tiny seed. Each of us begins in a small egg or as a small infant. Maybe fire is like that too. Perhaps it can grow if we feed it. And so she puts it into some dry grass and it grows. And so to this day, the spider, the little water spider, carries a little bowl on her back, and as a reminder of how great things might be done by little creatures, which is a fun story, and it's the kind of thing that will show up maybe in a second or third grade classroom as a pourquoi tale, right? These kind of fun little stories. And as a result, it still occupies kind of a place in our Western perspective of the quaint, maybe moralizing parables of oral traditional peoples, when in fact it might just simply be the title page of what could be an encyclopedic collection of natural history that is remembered by the people who tell that story, right? Because of the detail that what we get is a distillation of it, right? A little synopsis. But if you think about that story, it's kind of like a basket, the Sky Woman's basket. It's a container. You could catalog every known animal in the telling of that story. And in the course of telling the story and how each animal attempts to solve that problem, identify that animal so that now you can go into the woods and know this is who that is, this is who that is what this is why that happens to be. And now you know where you are, right? You know the natural history. Furthermore, looking again into the basket of the story, if you will, you can see there that these are people who have historical memory of the Ice Age, right? Who carried that memory in their stories, who had direct experience with the megafauna of the Ice Age and and observed the changes that followed as the ices receded, right? So what might at first appear as a child's picture book, you see, might in fact be simply the opening of a vast basket of knowledge and memory. If we can look into that basket a second time and not simply dismiss it as the product of fear, superstition, and a childlike imagination. In fact, colorful imagination makes it even more, all the stories all the more memorable. So this is my thesis for you today, is the question of kind of with what eyes are we looking at the stories of others from times before us or places distant from us or cultures other than ours, who have different ways of describing the world that they know, of seeing the world. And if we looked at, if we can change the way we see, what might we see in Sky Woman's Basket? I mean, let's take the story of the Sky Woman's Basket, which I haven't really given you much information about. That story I find in the memoirs of Sir Lawrence van der Post, a storyteller from South Africa, who spent much of his time among the people of the Kalahari, the San people, and as a child had been told that story by his nurse, a San nurse, who would tell it to him as a bedtime story. Okay, so these people, what's in that story? Well, we know, just from looking and listening to the story, that they had domesticated animals, right? They had an institution of marriage, a tradition of promise keeping, right? But they saw things like ladders from the sky. Now, into our imagination, we might think, well, that seems kind of unrealistic, sort of fantastic. Although, if I remember, Jacob wrestles with angels on a ladder from the sky. And in fact, we actually have seen phenomenon such as the plasma discharge, what we would call a plasma discharge of lightning, that could easily be simply described as a ladder from the sky. And even today in our astronomy, we make reference to the Milky Way. You know, so we still carry with us that seed of kind of mythological thinking that helps us to know the world around us, even when we sometimes dismiss it as non-scientific thinking. My colleague Joseph Bruchac, an Abenaki poet and storyteller, makes the observation that the Iroquois people had stories about the walking hill monster, which the Europeans poo-pooed as being simply a boogeyman type story, right? It's nothing real. But what the Iroquois were telling stories about were what we call, that the Europeans called, the woolly mammoth. See, because again, they had direct memory of the Ice Age megafauna. But the fact that they called it a walking hill meant it was a fairy tale, as opposed to when we call it a woolly mammoth. Well, a woolly mammoth, just what does that mean? It means a hairy big. So which is a better description of the animal, a hairy big or a walking hill, right? So you see, sometimes what gets in the way of seeing, what gets in the way of knowing someone or appreciating some of what's in the basket is the way we see it, right? The way we hear it, the way we find it. That's changing, though, in interesting ways. There are new fields in the sciences that are emerging, fields like geomythology and archaeoastronomy, in which the oral traditions of non-Western people have begun to be understood as being rich with memory, information, history, and knowledge that can be then understood or translated, if you will, into scientific terms. So one example of that comes from the Native American theologian, philosopher Vine Deloria in his book, Red Earth, White Lies, in which he tells about the event in 1865 in Oregon, when at Fort Klamath, a young soldier recorded the oral traditional story of an elder Klamath woman who was telling about the battle between the chief of the above and the chief of the below over the daughter of the people's chief, and how that battle raged for many days and how it happened in so many different ways, describing the chief of the world below throwing great boulders and shaking the earth, and the chief of the world above bringing down clouds and lightning and rain and all of these different events and whatnot. And so this fantastic, epic fairy tale from the perspective of a Western listener was, for the first time in 1865, committed to writing what had been oral tradition up until that point. It wasn't until the 20th century when geologists looked at that story and then compared it with their geological reconstruction of the eruption of Mount Mazama that formed Crater Lake in Oregon, that they realized that the story describes that event. That if you accept if you look at the way that event is personified and anthropomorphized, you can still see that the event is fairly accurately depicted. And the interesting thing about that, to me especially, is that's a memory that's over 7,000 years old, that was never written down. There's often debate, which is going to be the better repository of knowledge and information, writing or oral tradition. But writing's not been around long enough to answer that question, right? So this leads people like the geomythologist and Bruce Massey and Paul and Elizabeth Barber to make observations as they did in their article on exploring the nature of myth and its role in science. The fact that virtually all traditional knowledge keepers believe that myths and legends to be historically true, whereas nearly all scientists presume they do not represent factual historical events, is a disquieting conundrum that tells us more about the biases of Western science than the nature of myth. So there's a story that comes from the plains, Western plains of the Americas here, that is told by various different indigenous groups, but it's a variation of the story. It's about Coyote, that trickster. Coyote is walking along, and he hears some singing, and he comes into a little grove, and there's Rabbit singing his sacred song. And as Coyote watches, Rabbit does something really amazing. Rabbit takes out his eyes and he throws them up into the sky. And Rabbit sings to his eyes, and his eyes look in the four sacred directions, to the east, to the south, to the west, to the north. And then Rabbit calls them back. And Rabbit has been able to see all of the directions around him to know where he is. Coyote, being Coyote, barges right in and says, "Teach me that trick." Rabbit tries to put Coyote off, but Coyote is too insistent. And so eventually Rabbit gives in and shows Coyote how to throw his eyes into the sky and to call them back. And immediately Coyote gives it a try. He throws his eyes up into the sky. He looks to the east. He looks to the south. He looks to the west. He looks to the north. He sees in the distance a village. Aha! I will go to those people. I will show them this trick, and they will really admire me. And so his eyes come back to him, and he goes off, and Rabbit says, but before you go, never mind. Impulsively, Coyote runs off, and he goes to the village that he has seen, and he says, look at this great trick that I can do. And, he's a busker, right? So he gathers a crowd, and he throws his eyes up into the air. And they go to the east and the south and the west and the north, and they come back, and the people, wow, that's amazing. He sees another village. He runs off, and he goes and he starts showing off. He's throwing his eyes into the sky, and everybody is impressed and admires Coyote, but eventually his eyes don't come back. Now, in some variations of the story, the eyes are caught in the high branches of pinyon pine. In some versions, his eyes just keep going and become enamored of the stars. But whatever the case is, Coyote has thrown his eyes away. And now he's stumbling around without any eyes, and crawling along the ground, he comes upon Mouse. And Mouse says, "Coyote, you don't have any eyes." Mouse says, "I have 2 good eyes. I'll give you one of mine." So Mouse gives Coyote one of his little eyes. Coyote puts it into an empty eye socket. It kind of rolls around in there because it's a tiny little eye. And because Mouse is a little creature and he deals with what's in front of him, that's all Coyote can see, right? What's right in front of him, just the tiny things that are up close. And so he's just going from point to point to point to point until he bumps into Buffalo. Buffalo says, "Coyote, you're missing an eye. I've got 2 good eyes. I'll give you one of mine." So Buffalo gives Coyote one of his big bulging eyes, and Coyote tries to stuff it into the other empty socket, but it's much too big, so it's kind of bulging out. And Buffalo's eyes see wide across the distance. They see the horizon. They see far and wide. So here's Coyote now going around very, very dizzily, looking up close with his mouse eye and far out with his big buffalo eye, completely disoriented as he's looking through other eyes than his own. Now, typically in the story, the birds take some pity on him, and they roll up gumballs from the sap of the pinyon pine for him to put into his face as his new eyes. And they warn him, just as the rabbit had tried to warn him not to overdo it. They warn him not to get too close to the fire, but Coyote gets too close to the fire. The sap kind of drips and melts and burns down, and that's what gives Coyote his mascaraed look on his face. But I think his eyes are still up there in the sky, because if you go out at night in the desert and you see Coyote, he'll be up on the ridges calling to his eyes, calling them back, you see. And if he stops for a moment and he looks at you, you will see that where his eyes should be, there's starlight sparkling. So I can't help but think that the idea that somebody throws their eyes away seems sort of ridiculous, right? And yet, well, how often do you see this? How might we have, like Coyote, been throwing our eyes away? In some ways, I can't help but see Coyote as being like that Western man who barges into somebody else's sacred circle and culture and says, "I like the way you're doing that. I want to do it. Now I'm going to go off and be the guy who does that." Right? Not knowing really the essence of it, That's where we get into conversations like issues like appropriation, right? Now that's tricky for me, because I should tell you right now, this is my caveat throughout all of my work, is that I'm not trying to tell these stories to represent or misrepresent the culture of origin. I'm trying to tell these stories because I'm trying to see what I can see in these stories. That's how I see my role as a modern American, white, Eurocentric, hetero, male storyteller. So like Coyote, you see, in some ways, maybe I've taken on the other stories like Coyote, putting on the eyes of someone else to try to see through them. But there's something to learn from that at the same time. And I have to now make a personal confession to you, which is this, that a little over a week ago, while we had already been discussing today's theme, and this was an idea that I've been exploring for some time, my right eye started going bad on me, started going all fuzzy. It would blink in and out of being clear and then being fuzzy. Now it happens, and maybe some of you can sympathize and recognize this, but it happens that I've had cataract surgery in both of my eyes. And so in both of my eyes, I've had my lens replaced. My left eye is the distance eye. It's the buffalo eye. My right eye is the eye for seeing up close, for reading. And it's the mouse eye. And it's the mouse eye, the lens came loose. And it literally has been rolling around inside my eye. I'm going to the doctor tomorrow. This is perhaps irony. Perhaps it's what happens when you take up somebody else's stories and don't know what kind of fire you're handling, right? So I have been warned by my Native American colleagues that to tell stories of Coyote is to invite Coyote into your life. And so it may be that the trickster now has come to me to sort of shake my head a little bit and maybe help me lose my eyesight. But it also has brought insight with the loss of the eyesight, which is this, is that I realize that in order to try to see with other eyes, maybe I have to lose my own eyes. Maybe we do need to throw our eyes away. I certainly have seen this in my marriage, that it might help if I throw one eye away so that I might try on her eyes and try to see through them. With what eyes might we be changing? How might we be changing our eyes in this present day? Because I think we are in a time where we are throwing our eyes away, but we are also bringing new eyes to replace them. We are changing the way we see things. And this has clearly been happening since, in current history, right? In our contemporary society here in America, we've begun to realize that there were things that we thought we knew that we didn't really know, right? There was a way we saw the world until we saw that it maybe wasn't the world that we're living in. Does that make sense? This is where we have maybe an entree, if you will, to some kind of a conversation, because I don't have answers. I have more questions typically than I do have answers. But I feel that in many ways as Unitarian Universalists, one of the things we do is we try on different eyes. We try to see through different eyes, to see if that can give us maybe a better understanding of the world that we live in. But in order to do that, we have to be willing to occasionally give up an eye, to exchange eyes, if you will, to engage in an exchanging of perspectives. So with that thought in mind, I'm going to open this up with Molly's help to see what your eyes maybe have to offer.
Thank you, David. That was a telling experience. We welcome our congregation members, guests alike. If you would like to give some civil discourse, please come up and talk about our Sky Woman's empty basket or full basket.
Well, I have some good news, I hope. Just thinking about your eye and your eye problems, and I'm not an ophthalmologist, but I had both eyes done, and one eye got very fuzzy, and it was scar tissue from the cataract, and they just lasered it, and I was fine. So I'm hoping to give you some good news and some hope. And I think other people have had the same problem. So I wish you well. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And I don't really necessarily mean to be asking for sympathy on that particular score, because as a storyteller, this is something that has annoyed my children, actually. I remember my son would always say to people, "My dad finds meaning in everything." I just cannot help but find it meaningful, right? I cannot help but find it meaningful that that my own certainties, about what I see in the world need to be dislodged sometimes, right? That if we can come from a place of uncertainty, maybe that's like throwing our eyes away a little bit. Maybe that's a way of trying to understand, to broaden our understanding. This actually, and again, Molly, just be our our interlocutor here, but This actually is something that it makes me think about how we have seen issues in our culture in recent years about the assault on truth, right? And to think that somebody might come out here and begin to wage a kind of a rhetorical war on what we consider to be the facts and the truth, with whom we may disagree, somebody with whom I strongly disagree, right? Going on about fake news, et cetera. Yet at the same time, that has dislodged our eyes. You know, it has brought into question. And then at the same time, as we were shut down by a pandemic, we had the revelations that came to us from what is now referred to as, I think, as the Black Lives Matter movement, but revelations about our own history, realizing that maybe there was some fake news. Maybe it was a different kind of fake news. Maybe it's a good thing to question reality, right? To question authority. Well, that was something we used to rally around at a certain age. That was the rallying cry, wasn't it? Question authority. Yeah. I think maybe I would adjust that to question assumption. Thoughts?
Very thought-provoking. Thank you. I'm Jim. I think I know most of you. Hello. A couple of things. I'm sitting next to Gail looking through light, a chalice, to a quilt of a chalice. And then, of course, Linda comes up, and she is a bearer of good news, completely unrelated to what we're talking about right now. But the idea of good news for what's going to happen with your eyes is second only to the discussion of, when I had my knee surgery, I was walking on the steps. 2 days later, given to Lynn the day before her scheduled knee surgery, when everybody has said how bad it was. It's nice to have good news, isn't it? And so much of what we talked about from the story on is talk about seeing, and what do we need to see? We need to light. Think of the university symbols, mostly in Latin, so we really don't know what they're saying. But they use the word lux, light, right? Think of the logo of the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness. We had the Dark Ages. We have then the Enlightenment. And what was that? Well, it was really to keep looking. That's really what the Enlightenment meant. They figured out a lot of things, but keep looking. We have our chalice, and as Unitarians, we have a chalice that is not in the center of one circle. It's off to the side in two circles. So it should be crooked, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's the thinking with the other eye in the other direction. And science now has bought into that, because what's the thing people don't understand? And what do we call it? It's dark matter. If you read the cutting edge of science, you read about dark matter. And what is it? We don't know.
Yeah.
You know, we can't see it. It's dark matter. So we've gone from, in a sense, ridiculing the Dark Ages to investigating dark matter. So it's going to be pretty interesting. So thank you very much for this discussion.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Your comments maybe brought a few things to mind. First of all, the idea that, like even knee surgery and eye surgery and all that sort of thing, we are all of an age here where we're falling apart, right? But again, finding meaning in that is that, these things, it helps, I think, it helps us to experience the world anew when things that we were so sure of fall apart. That that in just about every creation story, you have chaos before you have cosmos, right? You cannot have a new creation then without some kind of falling apart. My mother was a high school science teacher. And one of the things that she taught me was, if I wanted to be a scientist, I didn't have to know anything. She'd say, I said, great, I'll be a scientist. That'll make it easy in my, school, right? She'd say, yeah, you don't have to know anything, but you have to wonder about everything. She said, wonder is the beginning of science. Knowing is the end of science. I started out to be a scientist, ended up as a storyteller. Because they both begin in the same place, the place of wonder. Let's have a little musical reflection. What do you think? Okay.
It's in G, Eddie.
It's like young musicians who think they know everything. It's not possible. It's a death knell to groan. Oh, if you know this song, sing along. It's by Joni Mitchell. Rows and flows of angel hair, ice cream castles on the air, feather canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in my way. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, up and down, still somehow it's cloud illusions I recall. I really don't know clouds at all. Moons and dreams and Ferris wheels, the dizzy dancing we feel as every fairy tale comes real. I've looked at love that way, but now it's just another show. You'll leave on laughing when you go, and if you can, don't let them know. Don't give yourself away. I've looked at love from both sides now, give and take, and still somehow it's love illusions I recall. I really don't know love at all. Tears and fears and feeling proud to say I love you right out loud. Dreams and schemes and circus crowds, I've looked at life that way. But now old friends, they're acting strange. They shake their heads, they tell me I've changed. Well, something's lost, but something's gained in living every day. I've looked at life from both sides now, from give and take, and still somehow it's life illusions I recall. I really don't know life at all. Pretty good.
Great, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, one last little bit from me. A lot of me today. Sorry about that. One of the ways in which we changed our eyes, because we have been throwing our eyes, and we threw our eyes into outer space. And in our generation, we looked back on ourselves for the first time, right? And look at how that has had a ripple effect on the way that we see the world. From that very first image that was sent down by NASA from the Earthrise over the moon, it's completely changed. So I am optimistic. Speaking of ophthalmology, that we are changing the way we see things. It's understandable though to be impatient to see some of the fruits of those changes. But Dr. Edgar Mitchell, one of the Apollo astronauts, on his way home to Earth from space, having seeing that new perspective, writes this in his book, The Way of the Explorer. I realized that the story of ourselves as told by science, our cosmology, our religion, was incomplete and likely flawed. I recognized that the Newtonian idea of separate, independent, discrete things in the universe wasn't a fully accurate description. What was needed was a new story of who we are and what we are capable of becoming.
Thank you again, David Novak, for a very telling experience. This fellowship is important to us all. The contributions that we make today allow us to sustain and grow our congregation to reach out to the community and the larger world. Your giving affirms our commitment to each other and the community. Thank you. With grateful hearts, we receive these gifts. May they lead us to live lives of integrity, compassion, and peace. If you like, please look at me with your order of service. Some announcements for this week. Many of us will get together after the service for a dinner. If you'd like, you can see Linda Heidenberg or Marge about that. Are we going somewhere today, Linda? Crafty Burger at Antiquity in Cornelius off of Catawba and 115. The fence build did not happen because of cold weather, but we would welcome anyone, no skill necessary, to come for our next Saturday fence build, which is Saturday the 27th over in Denver. If you'd like more information about that, you can see me or Jim Price. And Movie Tuesdays, if you're interested in Movie Tuesday, you can see your order of service and reach out to Marge about that. Oh, Linda, thank you. I believe we did our closing words.
I did.
Okay, that's okay. Our closing song today is number 1068, Be Ours a Religion. Oh, yeah, go ahead. There you go. 1058.
1058.
I can't see here.
Who knew there was 1,000 and more hymns? We are a religion. Sunshine goes everywhere. Temple of peace. The shining good heart. Its creed, its its truth, the ritual works of love. It's very short. I don't know, should we repeat it?
Yes, let's repeat it.
Ours a religion, like sunshine goes everywhere. Temple, all space, shine with good heart. Its creed, its truth, the ritual works of love.
We
were better the second time. See, we got better.
B, ours a religion with multiple eyes. Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. It's written in order of service. We extinguish this chalice, but not one. The warmth of
Unity or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Shalom.
Namaste.
Great job, Molly. That was fabulous. I really enjoyed that. Yeah. A lot of food for thought.